Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to talk about something that I haven't done I haven't done a broad subject video in a long time. I think maybe the last one I did was maybe about demographics, but I wanted to go into something about publicity. And when I say publicity, I mean advertising and stuff for a movie, and more specifically, very very manipulative publicity. But I'm going to go into a couple different factors of it, but. This kind of all got brought up because in the past weeks to few months, David Fincher, who directed Mank, which has been nominated for a couple of Academy Awards, I believe, or will be nominated when the voting is in, and. But I shouldn't say the voting nomination doesn't start till March, but I'll get to that later because that actually has something to do with the rest of this video. But when David Fincher he made some inflammatory comments, or when I say that, I mean it's kind of like when film people see it, they're like, "Are you nuts?" Or either that, or they just assume that he's a troll, which is probably more the case. But the thing is that a lot of people just view this as, oh, David Fincher's just being a d-bag on an interview, and in reality, it's not. See, the thing that I think a lot of people forget when you're seeing an interview like on a press junket or something for a movie, when they're interviewing actors and stuff like that, and the actors try to make themselves seem likable. They have the small talk and stuff, and sometimes that's real to an extent, but the thing is that people they like to put actors and actresses up on pedestals, and sometimes that's okay in certain situations, but in the sense of this is somebody who's literally paid to pretend they're somebody else and make it believable. So seeing somebody in a press junket and seeing somebody in an interview, that might not necessarily be who that person is, on and off the camera. But the thing is they have to play, even if they're not like that, they have to play that act for that movie. The actors in the past, also because of non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, in a lot of cases, whenever they sign that contract, they have to go on that press junket and they have to promote that film. Now, it doesn't look very good when you have somebody from a press junket, somebody that's involved in the film, bad-mouthing the film. That's bad publicity. And generally, that's something that you don't want to do, because the kind of thing that I'm talking about with David Fincher is planned bad publicity, and that is completely different than actual bad publicity. You can see that with maybe like Josh Trank's Fan Four Stick movie, the crappy one that came out in 2015, with Miles Teller and Michael B. Jordan and a bunch of random people. And that movie, basically, right before it came out, he tweeted out that they'll never be able to see the actual version of his film, and yada 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 yada. And whenever that happens, you kind of usually assume it's genuine, because the studio does not want that shit happening. And that movie was a flop at the box office. It did not make any money. But when I talk about what David Fincher has been doing, David Fincher has been making selectively bad publicity, but not necessarily anything that reflects back at the studio or the film. And it actually is very specifically aimed, and I'm going to go over some dates here because this is going to put this a bit more in perspective. Now, David Fincher had some comments about Joker. This was in November of last year. The specific date is November 15th. And I say that because I made a video about it when I remember seeing it. So it was either the 15th or maybe a day or two before that. And he makes those comments about Joker, that was one of the most successful independent, well, I shouldn't say independent, but lower budgeted films that had ever been made. It grossed over $1 billion, and I think the budget for that movie was somewhere around 50, maybe less. And that movie made a ton of money on a lower budget, which, again, it was nominated and won several Oscars, including Joaquin Phoenix for Best Actor. So that movie was a big Oscar success, and it was a big public success, and he comes in and starts hammering on that movie. And what happens? All of the news outlets run with the whole, oh, David Fincher hates Joker angle, and they do all that stuff, and that's out within a day, probably on that day, right after that interview was aired. That was out in the public air, and those articles were already popping up. So when you have that situation already happening, you look at what's actually going on with the studios and how that's working into the advertising campaign, because Mank, the movie that actually is being nominated for Oscars right now, and is favored to be nominated for a lot of very big Oscars, maybe not win them, but at least be nominated. That movie premiered in theaters on November 13th of last year, roughly the exact same time as he makes the Joker comments, which again makes sense. He was on a press junket. But when you look at that interview that was done with him, where he talks about that, he specifically goes after a film that was popular with a lot of critics as well as a lot of audiences. So a lot of the Oscar crowd was also talking about that film as well. You're aiming the comment at the Oscar crowd because Mank is an Oscar bait film. That's the only reason why that movie was made. It was made, in terms of the studio greenlighting it, it was made to win Oscars and get nominated for Oscars and have the buzz and everything around it, and you plop in a big actor center stage like Gary Oldman, and you have a big director behind the camera with David Fincher. So you have all the check marks for when that thing is nominated for an Oscar, but you give it a little bit of an extra boost on the weekend by drawing some negative attention, and I think everybody's just kind of accepted at this point that David Fincher's kind of a weird, douchey guy, and he draws attention to himself, but now everybody's talking about David Fincher. And what happens? David Fincher just released a movie. It's the timing is impeccable. And then you look at the second instance of this also happening, which was only a couple of weeks ago, and David Fincher makes a comment about how auteur theory cannot apply to film. And he made those comments on January 29th. Now, nobody who is not a film, unless you're a film person like me, or a really, or like a snobby film person especially, you're not going to know or care what auteur theory is. But all of the major movie sites ran with that. Now, that's kind of a niche article in itself. But the thing is that article is aimed specifically at one group of people. And those are the people that give a fuck about auteur movies. And those are the people that vote on the fucking Oscars. And that's why he bothered even making that statement. I don't even know if he believes the statements that he's making, or if he's just making them because he's very good at trolling people, especially people in his own sort of circle in terms of the other people that work on movies. But the comments for that were put out on January 29th. What happens on February 1st? Preliminary Oscar voting begins. Okay? So you have a 2-day gap in between this new thing that then again got carried by the media outlets and the preliminary Oscar voting. So there's no way you have a coincidence there. These were deliberately released statements to draw attention to David Fincher's film for the Oscars and for the nomination, and they were comments that were mostly specifically aimed at the Oscar voting crowd. So now you go down, and I guarantee you this is probably going to happen, is March 5th is when the nomination voting, the actual voting for the movies that are going to be nominated, the movies that have already been submitted, that voting is going to be starting on March 5th of this year, which is in roughly 3 weeks. About 3 weeks. And what's going to happen there is you're probably going to see on March 2nd or 3rd, you're going to see him come out with another type of statement similar to these two things. Now, I am willing to give the fact that David Fincher is in the auteur community of directors. I mean, he doesn't make big blockbuster movies. He makes a lot of, very Oscar-type films, and he has his own little weird style that he does with not just the storytelling, but the stuff you see on screen. And he has a style that a lot of Hollywood people like. I like the style of a lot of his movies. I love Fight Club, but the whole thing is that he's not really going to release these statements because he has no reason to if there isn't if there wasn't something going on with his film. So it doesn't make sense for him to continue making any statements like this past March 5th. So I have a funny feeling after, well, at least after the Oscars, after the actual awards air, you're going to see, you're not going to see any statements for him for a while until maybe he makes another movie. And the other thing that David Fincher kind of mentioned that kind of it hit me a little weird was he was talking about how a lot of Hollywood studios do not like to make the type of films that he likes to make. The kind of middle budgeted indie type of film with a lot of twists and turns. Again, the type of movies that he generally makes. And the thing is that the reason why is because they're not David Fincher. It just every director has a unique style, and when you're talking about budgets, though, I understand that when you're talking about budgets, it's like, okay, medium budget films are not as attractive to Hollywood people as a big budgeted film or a very low budgeted film that both have a chance as a high profit margin. Because let's be honest here, it's all the bottom line is money. It always has been. But the stuff that David Fincher does is, if David Fincher went up to a studio with a decent script and said, "I want to make this movie," a studio would probably throw money at him to make that movie, unless it was something outrageous like the cost that Scorsese's Irishman had to have. Although that was due to Universal, or I forget what studio it was, actually auctioning the film off to Netflix, so they had to pay $100 million just to get the movie, not even to make it. But I'm going off on a tangent at this point. The point is that publicity, there's always that term. Any publicity is good publicity, and this is what they mean by that. They mean by targeted bad publicity to get things hyped up for your film at the appropriate time and disguise it as nothing. And that's the thing that a lot of people got to remember when they're watching a press junket, is those people are there to promote that film first and foremost. And if they're not doing that, there's probably a lot of money on the line somewhere. Let's just put it that way. But again, that's just kind of a broad overspect of this, because this was kind of a glaring instance of it that I noticed, and this is something that's kind of recent. But I want to know what you think. Do you think the same way that I do, that most actors in press junkets and stuff are completely fake in a lot of the stuff that they're doing? Or do you believe that a lot of it is just genuine screwing around and, just the way those people would interact normally? Put your thoughts in the comments below. As usual, I like to read them. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?